concepts were there. Ideas were there.
I have concluded that I'm fighting against the clock, that I have but a short time to try to convince people that we are moving in an avenue where we are going to militarize space. As a result of militarizing space, we are going to acquire new technology. We're going to evolve new technology that's going to lead us into interstellar travel. As a direct result, we will become a threat to them unless we spiritually grow also.
We put nuclear weapons out in space as a line of defense, and we was ready to blow them up if they started in.
I noticed the satellite's positionings. I said, now this is supposed to be a system that tracks radar anomalies on Earth, right? You know, the whole thing, the movement. Yep, that's what it does. And I said, well, why are half of them pointed towards the outer space? Towards the moon, towards areas that are just blank space? Well, I don't know, was the reply. He says, never thought about it. I says, well, at least half of those satellites you got up there aren't looking at Earth. I said, what are they looking for? He says, well, you got to have need to know about that. I said, I see. In other words, who's coming? He says, we don't know. Dropped, end of subject. There was a fear then that of something out there. It became a very big concern. Asteroids, UFOs, people coming from other places. Paranoia was also there within the government. You know, at certain levels, you could feel it. You knew it was happening. Would they tell the truth about it? I doubt it.
So when I hear that there's a possible threat of extraterrestrials, and I look at the history of thousands of years of possible visitations, recorded history, and when I hear now the stories of the disclosures of honest military intelligence industry people who have had experiences with UFOs, with crashes and landings, with live or dead bodies of extraterrestrial beings, people from out in the universes. And if I'm ever told that these are enemies against whom we have to build space-based weapon systems, based on my own personal experience of having worked in the military-industrial complex on weapon systems and military strategy, I'm going to know it's a lie.
We know that these unacknowledged special access projects have used intimidation, have used threats, and at times people have been killed to maintain this secrecy. I know that this is an extreme statement to make, but I am convinced from talking to not one but dozens of military and intelligence men and women that this type of intimidation and threatening behavior has happened and continues to happen. I think this is something which is unacceptable in a democracy and in our society. Alfred Weber is a Yale Law School graduate who, while working for Stanford Research Institute, SRI, was charged with putting together the proposal during the Carter years for the official White House study of extraterrestrial intelligence. He testifies about how, at the moment that this proposal was approved by White House staff during the Carter years, that a Pentagon official appeared at Stanford Research Institute and ordered that the project be terminated, or the Pentagon would withdraw its funding for other lucrative contracts at SRI. He states that this action was not only illegal, but preempted the express desire of the Carter White House.
The goal of the study, in the context, there had been such secrecy and a gap in civilian scientific knowledge about the UFO phenomenon. And so the goal of the study was to fill the knowledge gap and to make policy recommendations for the future. It would have drawn upon the best scientific minds available, not only in the United States, but in countries around the world. This project was undertaken openly, of a civilian nature, with transparency. There was no classified aspects. It started at Stanford Research Institute in my offices. The full management of Stanford Research Institute had signed off knowingly on the proposal. Every 2 or 3 weeks I would meet with the White House staff, people in the executive office building. I was signed in and out. The structure of our proposal was that the White House would remain the overall policy director on this research proposal, which was envisioned to be about 3 years long. This project lasted from May 1977, when the initial contacts were made with the White House, until 1977, when it was terminated. The matter came under senior management when the proposal was unlawfully, in terms of illegal interference with contract relations, terminated. They had received direct communications from the Pentagon that if this study went forward, SRI's contracts with the Pentagon would be terminated. And the senior official advised me, and I'm quoting him, to dissimulate, quote, end of quote, and to just dissimulate and pretend I was going along with it, implying that I would keep my job if I did so.
He told us we could not talk about this to anyone, including any of the other crews, our spouses, our family, even amongst each other. So we could not discuss this at all.
It had been discussed with me on numerous occasions. Talked about what could happen to me militarily, and what could happen to me even if I discussed this as a civilian.
That subject just was dropped. It just wasn't discussed.
Anything to discredit you, and you'd never get a promotion, and I'd spend the next 3.5 years up at the North Pole living in a tent checking the weather balloons.
I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of it, out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government.
If their military personnel were to talk about this, they could be court-martialed, or at least threatened to be court-martialed, to get them to back down and to scare them. And other intimidations would be to hold their paychecks back, transfer them to other bases where a lot of people would not want to go to, like Alaska.
These two gentlemen began to question me about this event. And I remember, you know, saying to them, they were being pretty rough, you know, about it, to be honest with you. And I remember telling them, literally putting my hands up and going, "Wait a minute, fellas, I'm on your side." You know, whoa, just a minute, because they were not really nice. They were very intimidating and made it quite clear to the point that nothing that was seen, heard, or witnessed that transpired during that was to leave this building. You not to say a word to it about your coworkers, and off base. You know, just forget everything you may have seen or heard or whatever concerned with this. It didn't happen. My logbook, I never did see that again. I know we had a new logbook the next day, a brand spanking new one to start with, and that disappeared. They gave me this document where for 5 years it was absolutely out of the question. I could not leave the country under any circumstances whatsoever. And to leave the state of Virginia, I had to contact the Roanoke office of the FBI and let them know if I just wanted to cross the state line down here to go into North Carolina or just leave the state of Virginia. I had to let the FBI know about it. And that was for 5 years. after I was discharged.
I was arrested. I had all my gear taken from me by men in black camis, had no name tags. They were older men, probably in their late 30s or 40s. There were other people, I guess they were government, I don't know. They were there and they had containment suits. And then they took me, they put me on a cot that they had, and they had me cuffed with those, they had me cuffed both hands down, and then they had my legs tied together with those plastic fasteners that the police use. And they had a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and he did not identify himself. He might have, I just don't remember. And he told me, if we just took you out in the jungle, they'd never find you out there. And I'm like, well, and I didn't want to say, I didn't want to test him to see if he'd really do that. So I said, yeah. And he's like, you got to sign these papers, and you never saw this, and I don't exist, and this situation never happened. And if you tell anybody, you'll just come up missing. And he was a real abrasive, just a cynical asshole, I guess is the best way to put it.
And we were hit with an aerosol of some sort. I literally could see, I could hear, I could not see, and my nose ran profusely, and my chest got tight. I obviously was not getting into the car properly, so I was beaten, literally hitting in the ribs and pushed, and I was resisting. And I know Sergeant Bustinza was doing the same thing.
And he just said, look, mister, you don't go in and start any rumors and Roswell's, nothing happened out here. And he said, if you do, it'd be real serious problems. I said, I'm a civilian, you can go to hell. And that's where he said, you may be the one going to hell. And that's when he really told me, he said, somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand if you do that. So
measures have been taken by agencies to terminate people who appear to be inconvenient or troublesome through knowing too much.
I would go interview people that claimed they had seen something and try to convince them they hadn't seen something, or they were, hallucinating or something. Well, if that didn't work, another team would come in and give all the threats and threaten them, their family, and so on and so forth. And they would be in charge of discrediting them, make them look foolish, or so on and so forth. Now, if that didn't work, then there was another team that put an end to that problem, one way or the other. Secretary of Defense Forstall was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime has never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased. I said, how do you know all this? Or something to that effect. And he said, I know. He said, they'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family. Now, those were his words.
And they're yelling at me, and they're hollering and cursing, and you didn't see anything, and we'll do you and your whole goddamn family. And it was basically that for about 8 or 9 hours. These guys, they're just off on their own. There's no oversight, no control, and they just do whatever they want. They don't, and they're evil, man. These people are evil.